All right, so 7:07, guys. We'll go ahead and get started. I put some freebies out on the table. There's some new stuff out here. I would actually mention to you this Voice of Martyrs. It's really good. Think about free speech, freedom of religion. This is all other countries where that doesn't exist. And these are real stories in this very actually some other things. You know, the abortion topic is a big one right now, especially in the state of Texas. So this pamphlet talks about life at birth. Hey, how are you? Good to Rob. Yeah, good to see you. Yes, are you again? Yes, good to see you. I was just telling the team that that's free stuff. Be sure to put the table for your name. Voice of Martyrs is about the religious spirit of conflict, persecution, and oh my gosh, Middle East, Indonesia. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, it happens. Yeah, no, it's true. And so when you hear Christians, just a little commentary from Bob, when you hear Christians in this country say, I feel persecuted, and you read stories like from Voice of the Martyrs or like that, and you got to go, okay, persecuted, maybe that's a little strong, you know. But anyway, tonight's going to be really good. This is our second think tank. And remember, think tank is our effort to be a little bit more conversational, a little bit more discussion oriented, like a normal think tank where they talk about public policy issues. That's what we're into with this one. Kyle gave us the idea for the last think tank of the semester to talk about social issues. Okay, and I think that'll be fun. I'm going to take you up on that. But tonight we're going to talk about religious freedom and freedom of speech. And remember that the subtitle for this is Christian Civil Civics, because that essentially describes what we're trying to do. We're talking about civic things, citizen type things, in a civil way through the Christian world lens. Okay. So that this will be our agenda. We'll of course open with prayer. We'll get into these three topics in the think tank way. What does God say about freedom of speech and religion? What rights do U.S. citizens have? Examples of current issues. And then we'll discuss and talk about relevance in the apologetics space. Sound good? And then look at resources. All right. So let me open us with prayer. Lord God, thank you for the opportunity to live in a country that allows freedom of religion and devotion to you. Help us tonight to consider your direction to us, and help us to have the wisdom to separate the right and wrong from the left and the right. Lord, let us grow in knowledge and wisdom so we can discern the truth. Thank you for our hearts so that we can love those around us, especially our friends and family who don't yet follow you. Tonight, we ask for your spirit to be among us, to stimulate our intellects, and to assist us as we think through your will for our lives. We love you, Lord. Amen. So, a quick reminder for those of you that weren't with us a few weeks ago, the think tank topic was, what is our role as a Christian in society? And we came to three conclusions, and I just wanted to remind us of those three conclusions because they'll kind of undergird what we're talking about tonight. The three conclusions we came to is that Christians have a responsibility to make society more godly. Second, there are different ways to use your talents in that regard, right? You could protest if you think that something is unjust or needs to move in a direction to be more godly. You could have an elected position. You could be on a volunteer position in your community, et cetera, et cetera. A ton of different ways to help your society and community be more godly. And your ever increasing knowledge and wisdom will allow you to make God-fearing decisions. That's what we're doing tonight, right? We're studying these things so we can be more God-fearing in our decisions. Okay. All right, so let's switch back to free speech and religious freedom. What does God say about these? I bet you haven't thought necessarily about these questions too much. Because when we hear about free speech or freedom of religion, we think of it in a context of as a citizen of the United States, not necessarily what God says about these. But do you have any upfront thoughts about what God might say about these two areas? I'm going to grab a water. What do you guys think? Anybody? It's okay if you haven't thought about that. Yeah, well, a couple of things come to mind. One is that God gave us freedom, and freedom was almost our worst enemy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. With all of its consequences, we respected our freedom so much. Mm-hmm. And second thing is all things are lawful. Free speech is always free, but it's not always yeah, good points. And those points hold true to some degree in both our secular society and God's will, in a way, because you can't go into a movie theater and yell fire, right? There's a limit on your freedom of speech, and we're offered that. Anyone else? Thanks, Evan. I think those are generally in the space we're going to be in. I appreciate your comments. Let me start, and I want to make 4 points on this general topic of what does God say. The first point is a fact, and the final 3 are principles, and they're all coming from God's word. All right. So the fact that I want to point to is that Jesus and his disciples practiced free speech. All right, John 5:18-24. This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was calling God his own father, making himself equal with God. He was calling himself Son of Man. Right? He was saying things that he knew were true. So he was using his freedom of speech. Acts 26. This is when Paul was using his free speech. The Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. This is when Paul was talking to Festus and King Agrippa, and the Jews didn't like what he was saying to them. So he was using his freedom of speech again. And then Peter is in Acts 5:33. You remember the chief priest said to Peter, "Hey, settle down, okay? You don't need to whip the crowds up with all of your talk and rhetoric." And Peter says, "How can I not talk about the things that I have experienced and seen?" Right? And when they heard this, they were enraged and wanted to kill them. We can go into so many other areas in the Old Testament and New. What prophets, right? John the Baptist, why did he end up in Herod's prison? He used his freedom of speech, maybe unwisely, but he said, "Herod, you're doing the wrong thing by marrying your brother's sister." Yeah. So there's freedom of speech everywhere in the Bible, where you see people using it. Therefore, I would say it's endorsed, right? Freedom of speech is endorsed by God, by Jesus. So any questions or comments on that fact before we move on? Or do you maybe not think that's a fact, or do you think I'm misconstruing it in a way? The objection that the things that they are saying are endorsed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that freedom of speech is something. Mm-hmm. Right. This would be an inference. Yeah, this is an inference. It just like kidnapping is never is never talked about in the Bible, but we can infer that kidnapping is not something that's God willing. Indirectly. you know.
Well, something else maybe we might have to do is, when you talk about free speech, and talk about free speech would be restricted there, and that there might be speech that is restricted. And typically, I guess I think of it as a legal term rather than a religious legalistic term. But the only rules that Jesus was breaking, for instance, was against the religious leaders who whether or not it's blasphemy. So I feel like it was different because Jesus is breaking a religious law instead of a legal law. Like I guess the other thing too is that if you ever call himself Lord, but Caesar's the Lord. So I guess, but I feel like that applies more to people like the church and like after Jesus died, like when he was spreading to Gentiles and the Roman problems and stuff like that, where it's like, oh, well, but then again, like, I don't know how punishable it was, like, that Jesus is the Lord, when you're not Caesar, like, I don't know how much that's punishment. It seems like a lot of the punishment that they're trying to do is not, oh, they broke this law, it's more so because I'm angry at them for saying something I don't like. So it's not so much as freedom of speech, it's endorsed, I would say. I feel like it's more like saying things that can empower people. It's not like it's not like they can enforce that officially without police restraints,
Yeah, so the Jewish leaders were the direct rulers of the Jews, and the Romans were above them. Like the Romans would get involved. For example, the Jews couldn't convict Jesus of death. They had to have Pilate do that. So you had two layers of government going on, or governing going on. And so let me ask this question. Did the Jews say, you can have free speech, you can say whatever you want? Was it that type of governance that the high priest said, Daniel, you can say whatever you want?
If I recall correctly, calling himself equal God was an offense that.
Yeah, and what's the name of the offense? The legal name? Blasphemy. Exactly.
Blasphemy was something that you open up the Jewish law would exceed that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sure, they're free to say it in the sense that you can't restrict anyone from saying anything unless you actually purposes, it was forbidden.
Yeah. Now, freedom of speech, let's define it. In the context I'm trying to use it here, it means you're free to say anything without threat of harm or punishment, right? Exactly. They didn't have freedom of speech. They spoke anyway. Yeah. So maybe my definition is a bit confusing in this context, but think of it through Jesus' eyes. Is Jesus saying you have freedom of speech to his disciples?
Well, can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So, I see this freedom of speech question as it relates to God in the same kind of vein as, let's say, sin does. So, God, we're free to sin. We have the ability to do that, but it's not part of God's will for us. It's a fallen short, and God permits it for various reasons. But I would never say that it's God's will for somebody to sin. In maybe very specific circumstances when that's and that speech works the same way, and that we're free to say anything. But for example, if I were to give you a detailed plan right now of this murder and plotting in 2 days, God would be very pleased by that. That would be a reason for you to repent. In the world, I would never even have to say. So that's kind of how I see it. God endorses all true speech.
Mhm.
Or unrighteous speech, maybe it's permitted, but
Mhm.
enforced.
Yeah. So let's come back to this because I think to Evan's point, when I show you the three principles, which I think you'll agree with, let's come back and maybe there's a better way for me to establish this as a fact, okay? Because, well, we'll come back to it. I really like your comments on that, and it gives me some good feedback. So let's go to principle number one. We are free, or we are to speak God's truth. 2 Timothy 4:1-22, right? I charge you in the presence, be ready in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with complete patience and teaching. The time has come when people will not endure sound teaching, so you need to do sound teaching, et cetera, et cetera. Proverbs 31:8-9, open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. I think you could see dozens and dozens and hundreds of cases where God is asking people to speak the truth in both the Old and the New Testament. My personal reading right now is in Matthew 10. And this is the point where Jesus has his disciples in a place where he's ready to send them out. And he has just told them in Matthew, I'm giving you the power to heal and to drive out demons. And I want you to go out and spread the good news that the kingdom is near. All right. So this is about speaking the truth. Jesus was telling his disciples to do that. And I think when in John 3:16, our command, I think, is very similar. Go out and speak the truth about the gospel, about the separation between mankind and God. And now there's a solution for that dilemma. So any thoughts, disagreements about the principle that we're to speak God's truth? Okay. I'm going to come back to this too, because I put these principles in the order 1, 2, 3 in a certain there's certain rationale there. I think 1 is most important. Second principle, but speaking God's truth must be done correctly, like Evan was talking about a minute ago. And you see this a lot. I mean, these are just 3 passages. As for one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not quarrel over opinions. Paul in Romans. Paul also speaking to Timothy. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance, etc. But your style is going to win them over, is what Paul's saying. And Matthew 12, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. Any thoughts on that? Agree? So we're given the freedom to speak God's truth, but right, do it in a way that is not quarrelsome, that is patient, that is enduring. Okay. And then the third principle, we need to have thick skin. Now, this isn't necessarily about our free speech so much as it is for the free speech of those around us, right? Ecclesiastes, do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you, right? Sometimes, as a boss in an organization, sometimes you overhear your people grumbling and griping about a policy you made or something. I've heard it before. And hey, have thick skin, right? Your heart knows that many times you yourselves have cursed others. 1 Peter, if you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. So I think those 3 principles help govern our free speech from God. But any thoughts or any confusion on any of that? Yeah, Evan.
So more like the combination of what we
Mhm.
these principles seem also to line up with the way that Jesus used his speech, because there are times when the gospel say the son did say,
Yeah.
he could have, but he chose not to. for
Yeah.
various reasons. But then other times he opened his mouth.
Yeah. And think about his style, his Sermon on the Mount style. It was very ingratiating, right? He starts out with the Beatitudes. These are the people that God loves, the merciful, the kind, the poor in spirit. And then he moves into, this is what I don't want you to do anymore. I'm making the law even tougher on you, right? So he started out by giving them some little bit of kudos for things that they do and people that they are. But now, remember when he saw the Pharisees and he called them whitewashed tombs? So he wasn't so patient with certain groups, right? But he was speaking the truth in both occasions. John the Baptist called the Pharisees vipers. Yeah. So, and I think when Jesus turned over the money tables, I don't know if he was silent when he did that. We don't have a recording of him saying anything. We just know his disciples just watched. They didn't participate. So yeah, I think Jesus really models it for us. Maybe Paul is one of the best models for us, thinking about him going to Mars Hill and talking to the Greeks about Jesus and being very shrewd and crafty. Last point is when Jesus sent his disciples out in Matthew 10, he told them to be, do you remember what he told them to be? He said, be as blank as snakes, as vipers. Do you remember what that word was? Shrewd. Be as shrewd. Yeah, could be wise. And as innocent as doves. Yeah. So that's another style thing that fits in with these principles, right? Very tough to do. But these are principles, right? These are not things that we can always live up to. So let me go back though to my character. I want to correct it if I need to. Is this a fact? Jesus and his disciples practiced free speech. If we define free speech as telling the truth, telling it in a way that is not offensive to the degree that it's possible, and also having thick skin, it seems like Jesus and his disciples practiced those things.
I don't know if call that free speech.
Okay.
I guess, I don't know, it's how we think about free speech today is, I mean, it has to be-
Yeah.
well, it doesn't have to be truthful to be free, like,
That's right.
it just has to be like the young fire kind of leader, like if that's not true, and even if it is, like there should be a alarm system in place. So
Yeah.
it's like if it's incredibly dangerous, like actually incredibly dangerous to others, then that's not protected.
Yeah.
I think there's some threats that are not protected. So like,
Yeah.
but I think the way that we're having speech on this level is different than how we define it today. So that's why it kind of.
Yeah, I get it. I get the point. It's
These three principles are the only speech protected by the First Amendment. Then we have a very different.
That's right. That's right. And in fact, that point should be well made here, that just like the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus said, he said, you say that if you divorce a woman and make her an adulteress, or if you have sex outside of marriage, that's adultery. But I tell you, right, that if you even think of that with a woman, right? So Jesus said, you think the law is this, and I'm telling you it's this, right? Same way with free speech. If our country, let's say our country's the bastion of free speech in the world. I don't know that it is, but let's say that it is. To your point, God's principle about free speech is much more restrictive. than even what our country says, because you could have free speech that's untrue. It could be vile. It could be offensive. In fact, we have an NFL coach that got fired this week because he said something that was very offensive in an email 7 years ago. Yeah. So maybe we've beat this up a little bit, but I think we see that God speaks to free speech, particularly in the life of a Christian. And I think one of my points is if we had two countries and we said this country is, say, Venezuela, and they have no free speech in their constitution or their governing code, and this country says you have free speech within limits, can't say fire in a crowded theater or any theater. I think the more godly country is this one. It's not this one. But regardless of where you are, because Jesus was in this kind of country, right? You still spoke the truth and you did it in love, right? So that's kind of all about what we see in the Bible about free speech, both our accountability and how we should use it in the proper way. Okay, I'm going to segue now to how we are in this country, unless we have something else to talk about in this space. We good? Okay. Yeah, and then I'd also say that principle 2 and 3 are subordinate to principle 1, because if we, and principle 1 again was speak God's truth. So if we give up on speaking God's truth, it doesn't really matter that we're doing things kindly or correctly, or we have thick skin. If we choose not to speak God's truth, we're opposed to what Jesus commanded and what God commands. I think you guys would agree with that? And that's the real dilemma for us, is to kind of water down God's truth in this, particularly this more secular society and culture that we're in right now. So, okay. All right. I love this video. I've never showed it to you guys before. I want to run it, and it's about 7 minutes long. And there's a panel of religious, spiritual people, and they're at the end of their presentations, and they're doing a Q&A now. Okay. On this panel, there's 2 Christians. And what I want you to watch for is, how do these 2 Christians, how do they respond to some of what's going on the panel and the questions that are coming in? And just let's be critical and examine, like, what did they do right? What did they do wrong in this place of, God's free speech, speaking the truth, doing it in a correct way, and having thick skin. Okay.
With the seeming rise of noisy atheism, I'm wondering, Catherine, how are you sure that there is no God? No God? And is there anything that would convince you either to give up on atheism and become an agnostic, or a theist, or even a Christian?
That's a really good question. I couldn't be a Christian because I'm intolerant of intolerance, but I don't think anyone could call themselves a 100% atheist. I believe that there could be a God in the same way that I believe that there could be a tooth fairy, a Father Christmas, or an Easter bunny. So there's no proof to it. But it's not only
there's not an Easter bunny?
I'm sorry.
But Tooth Fairy?
For me, I mean, you can talk about proof and there's no proof. I mean, one of the things that I always think about is, like, if God exists, why doesn't he show himself? But when you actually look at the Bible, that's the only text that religious text that I'm really familiar with, it is basically social engineering embedded in fairy tales and horror stories, which is just chock full of homophobia, misogyny, discrimination, and division. And most people haven't even read it. It has been written by 44 60 people, I think, 44 chapters, 3 different languages over thousands of years, thousands of different interpretations. And despite all of those different interpretations, the only thing they can all agree on is homophobia, misogyny, discrimination and division. So I'm sorry, the way that I see it has just been a very, very handy way to keep people in their place, particularly women, homosexuals and people who don't believe what they believe.
Right, let's hear from the rest of the panel and I'll come back to Peter Jensen. Do you believe in God?
No, I don't. But I don't actually think it matters. I think you ought to live your life according to your own values, treat people the way you want to be treated, and live by those values. And if there's a God, then they'll work it out if it's a problem for me. But some people need spirituality, some people need belief. That's fine, it comforts people. That's their decision. Mine is I don't feel I need it. And I try and live my life according to my own values, and I think that's all that matters.
Conchetta.
Thank you. Well, I do believe in God, and I'm very proud to believe in God. And indeed, I know that there are millions of people around Australia who share my belief, and perhaps, believing in God and in Christianity and the values and beliefs that come with it for those, as I call the chattering classes, may not be very fashionable. But can I say that I believe that there is a silent majority in this country that believes in the traditions that go with Christianity, that go with the tradition of marriage that is opposed to same-sex marriage, and they are the silent majority in this country. And it really irks me the way that, people come along and just always rubbish God and Christianity. Do we hear you rubbishing, Allah or Buddha or anybody like that? Give the Christians a break, because there's millions of them in this country.
I'm sorry, I really need to say homosexuality is not a lifestyle choice, religion is. Keep that in mind.
Anna Crean, sorry. Anna Crean. It's a tough one. You start with the basic question, do you believe in God?
I'm pretty happy with a mystery. I think people who belong to a certain religion desire certainty, and I don't sort of disagree with that desire. People do want to have, they want to know, want to know some rules, and they want to have an idea of what's going to happen to them after and what's going to happen to them before. And I think that's fine, but I'm quite pleasantly happy with uncertainty and a mystery.
Mystery, Peter Jensen. Well, let me just pick up on something that Catherine Devaney said earlier. Why are there no more miracles? Why is it that only in biblical days people got the proof they required to become Christians?
Yeah. Oh. I'd like to see an arm grow back on or a head grow back on, One of the things that always amazes me...
No, this is his...
This is really interesting.
No, I really would.
He is an interesting person.
That would answer my question, if I saw that.
Catherine, we're going to give the last word to Peter Jensen on this subject.
Okay. Has God shown himself? Yes, I believe he has, and I believe he's shown himself in Jesus Christ. I believe if you want to know, examine his life, examine what he said, examine his miracles, and that's where the big issue is. Come back to Jesus Christ and examine his life, examine what he said, examine what's around him. I have to say that Catherine's account of the Bible is as fanciful as a tooth fairy. It's got no bearing on the reality of the Bible. Yeah, I've read it a bit. And really, look, I'll tell you what, the big story of the Bible is just as simple as anything. Jesus Christ came into the world to save us. And he is God amongst us. What more could we ask? It's the most gracious. I'm so sorry you've got your view of it.
You said what more could we ask? Equality. That would be good.
Well, we've got it because every man.
I'm sorry,
and
a white
woman,
middle-class man like you does have it. Try being disabled. Try being an asylum seeker. Try being gay. Try being a woman. You'll find it's not there.
Sorry, I said we give him the last word.
I think
the last word is that in Jesus Christ we have that equality, and in Jesus Christ we have that salvation. And all I can say is the most wonderful, that the love of God for everyone, no matter who they are, no matter how they've lived or whatever, is the greatest reality in the world.
Okay. We're ending tonight with a kind of blessing. We thank our panel, Chris Evans, Catherine Devaney, Peter Jensen, Anna Crean and Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells.
Okay. What did you see from the two Christians that kind of spoke to some of the principles that we were trying to discuss earlier. Yeah.
I mean, I'll say the guy, he was like, they're both. I'll say the guy was more so kind and patient. Like when she was like a church and something.
Yeah.
That's what they did. They were patient. And they kind of like, he was a little bit humorous as well. Just like,
He smiled a lot too, didn't he?
whereas the woman, like, she did the same, but then she was kind of.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying.
I feel like the woman like if we're looking for who represented the wins in this, that
Right.
was probably the men. But the woman was honest in that, like she said, like it irks me that this is happening, and she didn't like, she did get a little emotional, but she didn't like insult and around or anything like that. She kind of like brought up the valid point of like a little bit around how she brought up the point of like you're just picking on the beliefs in Christianity, why not pick on the other beliefs as well? So she did point out something that was valid and like good. Like I think even though she was a little bit emotional, I think she was saying just a reasonable point and not trying to argue like specifically like.
She probably didn't say anything that was untruthful. Yeah. Agreed. Maybe there's some how she was saying it, things that might have been a little bit improved.
What I was gonna say is you snuck in a little tap.
Yeah.
Either at Lynn or in the female Christian space, the tavern classes. You know, you're referring to people like that.
Yeah.
And I think both of those were less than ideal defenses of faith and representations of Christian.
Yeah.
Especially like when the guy started, I thought he was gonna do good, but then he started talking about how ridiculous the woman side of him, her opinion about the Bible was.
Yeah.
I thought that he probably lost her. Because then she was started to.
Yeah, he actually pulled her into the conversation when he did that. He gave her an opening, and she took it. Because he said, "Oh, Catherine, I'm sorry that you," and then she took the opening. He could have just stayed on.
And then like when you're dealing with somebody like that, whose goal is clearly only to shoot down the Bible, shoot down Christianity and everything it stands for. So I'm surprised they didn't recognize that she.
Yeah. You picked up on the term chattering classes, which is a bit defensive and a bit, could I say pejorative? People in the crowd could have said, "Are you saying I'm part of these chattering classes?" Or, is that?
Well, she kind of also on both sides of like the Christian silent majority, which like might have been the case, but even if it were the case, like that's not necessarily great sense to be like, oh, because most of us are just silent about this belief but hold it.
Yeah.
And she also kind of specifically like mentioned homosexuality, which maybe wasn't necessary because it seemed like it wasn't talking about like the one who brought it into the conversation was the atheist woman, but it seemed like she could have made a better point.
Yeah.
Even if it's true.
Yeah. Anybody else? A word that the woman used at the front end. Remember, the first thing she said is, "I'm a Christian and I'm proud of being a Christian." And at this stage in my life, I can tell you guys that Proverbs, pride goeth before fall. You've heard that before. It's really true. Whenever I look back on times that I've made mistakes with people, with relationships, at work, I've become proud, and that proud has shown up in sort of an arrogant way. And she started right out saying, "I'm proud of being a Christian." And I just I would watch that tonality if you're ever in that same situation. Give with Christians a break. It really irks me. So you could tell she was emotional, for sure, even though a lot of what she said was probably true. Yeah. Okay, so just some examples there of different ways of handling our God-given obligation for free speech. Now let's go to so freedom of religion. We talked about freedom of speech, and the way I'm defining freedom of religion right now is that each individual should have the ability to choose how and whom to worship. So is that in the Bible? Now, the answer to this is much quicker, but let's see what you think. You know, God provides, and Evan, you said it early on, God provides freedom for more than just whether we choose him as our God and Jesus as our Savior. He provides freedom for everything we do. So freedom of religion is just a part of the freedom of choice that we have from God. Now, if you're an Israelite 4,500 years ago, you could say God didn't provide much freedom of religion. He didn't say, hey, believe in anybody you want. He said, no, if you want to be a part of this community, because it was a theocracy, remember, God was ruler and God over that nation. You could say in a way that God didn't provide freedom of religion for the children of Israel, but it's a little kind of useless in a way because it was a theocracy, and if they wanted to leave, they could leave. They could go live, with the Canaanites, or they could go live with somebody else as well. So I think that's an easy answer. While the Bible clearly teaches there's one way, right, to God, John 14:6, and there's a particular God to worship, he gives us freedom to believe that or to not believe that, okay? So freedom of religion from God. We good?
In the same sense as Rodriguez sin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the whole thing either.
Yeah, it's in a way it's almost useless. I think that a lot of people forget about the freedom that God gives us to choose him or to not choose him, to love him, to not love him. So maybe it's worth bringing up in this context. That's about it.
I think the thing that bothers most people about this is like, sure, God might give us the choice to want to make this and we want to not make this. But some people would say, oh, it's not a choice because it's a threat. Like, I'm not free to do whatever I want because there's consequences to what I want to do. And so, in the sense of like laws, there can be like a law can't, like freedom of religion, the laws that we have cannot actually determine your eternal destiny or what is the truth. But when it comes to like the actual religion itself, like if you were practicing a religion, you're not free to do it in any other way but how the Lord says. Like if you don't believe in him, like good for you, but also not good for you because that's going to have consequences.
Yeah, you could logically say that Muhammad also says you don't have freedom of religion, and any religion, Buddhism, Hinduism, it depends, if they're pluralistic about their belief system. So you could say that in a sense, in the broad sense, though, God gives us freedom across the board, freedom to sin, freedom to say anything, freedom to do anything or believe anything.
But then there's not those eternal consequences that we can already pass. So on
Mhm.
we're free to you have that freedom of religion.
Yeah, God's not going to strike you down if you decide to be a Muslim tomorrow. He could. He has every right to. He has every right to. Yeah.
Really, that woman got really lucky when she made it inside the gospel period.
Mhm.
She got really lucky.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, God may have hardened her heart already, which would be the worst thing that could ever happen to you, right? It was God gives up on you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, pretty much, to me, I would say, some people just say take freedom as no consequences whatsoever. Like, it's just not, there's consequences for any choice. And then it goes into the free will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Really free will or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's even to bring it into this discussion, it's a little wonky, but I thought I would. What does God say about freedom of speech, freedom of religion? If somebody says God doesn't provide that freedom, I think you have a defense for that. I think you have an argument against that. So let's move now into as a U.S. citizen. So the First Amendment is pretty quick and easy. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or to peaceably assemble. So the attorneys call the red clause the establishment clause, and the green clause the free exercise clause. Okay, this will help in your. Daniel said you've got a midterm on this, right, or something like that. Kind of something related to this. So that, in a nutshell, that's what the First Amendment says. Doesn't say anything about how the tonality of your freedom of speech, or that you have to have a thick skin. And that, again, this is why I'm saying that Jesus modeled for us in God's word, is we even have more restrictions on our free speech than come in this country. You guys have seen this before. You've studied it probably several times. Now, this is a little bit of an eye test, but I want to take a little bit of a sidewinder with you right now. And that is, while we're talking about free speech, there is this narrative out there, and you've probably been taught this narrative somewhere along the way, that the U.S. Was not founded by Christians, or wasn't founded on Christian principles, or God was never really involved. And there's a fair amount of evidence against that. And so let's just take this side trip on this, and then we'll come back to free speech and free religion in a second. I bolded, so October 3rd, 1789. So let me go back. When this First Amendment was put to the first Congress, and they adopted it and moved on to the Second Amendment, and then the third and the fourth, and they went to the 10th Amendment before they voted on the total Bill of Rights. Okay, that 10-step process took about 2 years. Okay, but this first one was the most important one for them, and that's why it was first. And literally the week within October 3rd, 1789, they not only adopted that and moved on to number 2, okay, but they also told President Washington to create a national day of Thanksgiving. And President Washington said, that's a good idea. We just got done with the Civil War, and he created this proclamation. And you can see these bolded words. We're in his proclamation. Again, this is within 7 days of the First Amendment being adopted within that committee. He talks about the providence of Almighty God. He talks about Almighty God again. He talks about a great and glorious being, the beneficent author of all good, whether
prayers to him are sincere and humble thanks. He talks about the bottom paragraph, humbly offer our prayers and supplications to the great Lord and ruler of nations. Pardon our national and other transgressions, promote the knowledge and practice of true religion and virtue.
So the reason I bring this up is because, this is Thanksgiving, the day that we celebrate Thanksgiving. And there's another fact that plays into this. Okay, so you see that Congress's mindset did not exclude God at the very beginning. It didn't even exclude references to the Lord and ruler of nations, which is a reference to Jesus. Okay, this was within the first week of the Continental Congress. There's another fact that I want to make you aware of on this little side trip.
These are the 13 original colonies. Okay, and these were the predominant religions in the 13 colonies. All Protestant religions, except some Jews in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and some Catholics in the same states or counties in Delaware. I'm told that the charter, well, let me make this next point. The ones that are bolded in the charter of the colony, it says, for example, Georgia, you need to be a member of the Church of England to hold office and to vote in this colony. North Carolina, same, South Carolina, Connecticut, you have to be a Puritan. You have to be of the Puritan faith. So these colonies, in their charters, which was long before 1789, some of them in the late 1500s, 1600s, they established a state religion. So then put all this together. So does that help?
Well, yeah, that's not the because that we bolded Anglican North America. That's not the history that they're teaching you.
Is that right? My understanding is Anglican is what was in the charter, but I may have that fact wrong, possibly.
Well, I would say that the history that it was taught in Maryland was that it was Catholics that were settled there, but there wasn't any state religion, and it didn't take effect at all when Catholics were outnumbered. So
this is Maryland. Maryland.
Well,
Mary's land.
That name is after Mary of William and Mary, who were very much Protestant, and it was a concession, something to please the royalty so that they would be allowed as Catholics to settle.
Oh, okay, so it's not made for the very.
No.
Yeah.
Those who come up with the name, they probably don't know.
Maybe.
Right.
Maybe a duel. But the point I want to make is even notwithstanding, I may have Maryland wrong there. Maybe it shouldn't be bolded, or if it's bolded, it should have another religion. Over half of the colonies had an established religion in place. So that's why the First Amendment was first. They wanted to make sure this new federal government did not try to establish a religion, okay, the Establishment Clause, that didn't match up to what their preferred religion was. Okay, so this is kind of easy to see. Furthermore, than you saw, George Washington's statement. So God was not absent from their mind. He was not, they were not trying to create a secular society. It doesn't matter what anybody tells you today. Yeah, go ahead.
More historical. I was just wondering if maybe those established religions were one of the colony charter that were sometime later. And I'm also wondering what's the distinction between
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought the Anglicans were, I don't have a good understanding. I thought the Anglicans were differentiated from the Church of England.
Well, there is, I can't remember how it went, but there were several different strains of Christianity that
Mhm.
had heavy political impacts throughout the Republican crisis. And
Mhm.
but I think the Church of England is the one that came out of the Republican Cromwell,
Mm.
and then the Catholics came back for a very short time, and then at some point I think that Anglican, the Henry Church, ultimately is the one that is now. But I mean, you see Church of England churches
Mhm.
that aren't Anglican per se. You see them.
Yeah. Yeah. When they kind of separated from Rome.
Well, no, I mean, you see it. I visited a church in like Geneva, Switzerland. That was Church of England.
Church of England.
Denomination.
Yeah. So I think the point, though, is that they were serious about religion back then, to the point where they were establishing it in about half the colonies. And when they formed the United States, they said, we don't want this to happen again over us, right? So a little side trip there. Now I want to take you to some actual cases that are in play right now, that some of them have been resolved, some of them are still in play, that have both freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And this is a freedom of speech case. And we're going to wrap up here in the next 10 minutes, and then we can talk about this. This is the Frederick Douglass Foundation versus the District of Columbia. So what happened here is in June 2020, a mural, a Black Lives Matter mural, was painted on the street using permanent yellow paint. And that was the entire city block. So it was a really large mural on the street. Shortly after, another mural reading "Defund the Police" was also painted on the street. So the Frederick Douglass Foundation and Students for Life of America then sought to paint a similar mural outside of the Planned Parenthood Carol Whitehill Moses Center. So it was a Planned Parenthood center. And these students wanted to paint a mural outside that, and they wanted to write "Black Preborn Lives Matter." Well, the city refused to grant the permit for that. So instead of painting that, these students that you see here on the right, they used chalk to write that message on the sidewalk outside the Planned Parenthood clinic. So "Black Preborn Lives Matter." Well, the guys on the left were cops, and the cops arrested these students and put them in jail. So shortly after, the Alliance for Defending Freedom, if you're interested in this kind of thing, ADF is the main group. There's a couple, but they're one of the main groups in the country that's defending religious freedom and freedom of speech, particularly within the Christian community. They filed suit, and they won. The First Amendment, protects the right to peacefully share a pro-life message. And my understanding, no, sorry, this is still active. This is not this as of 10/1. So this is still active, and it has not been resolved yet. So that's an example of freedom of speech that was denied and is still active in court right now. Here's another one from ADF. This is Dr. Kenneth Howell. He's a teacher. I don't know what university he's at. Yeah, University of Illinois, thank you. He teaches a class called Introduction to Roman Catholicism. In that class, he gave an overview of the Roman Catholicism's views, which included the church's historical view on homosexuality, which states that a person is not morally responsible for feeling same-sex attraction, but acting on that attraction is gravely immoral. So he was fired because in this class, which is, again, the title is Introduction to Roman Catholicism, okay, at University of Illinois, a secular university, government-run university. He was fired for making that statement. And again, his point is, if I was teaching a class on civil engineering, I wouldn't have brought that up, but I'm teaching a class on Catholicism and their beliefs. So he was fired. ADF actually filed suit, and his outraged students, because he's a beloved teacher as well and did a good job, his beloved students and ADF filed suit, and he was reinstated to his position. So that one's closed. He probably teaches a different class now, I don't know. Emily Booker, this one's interesting. This person's a little bit more your age. When she was a freshman, she received a class assignment to perform homosexual behavior in public, such as holding hands or kissing, and then she had to write a paper about the experience. She didn't do the assignment, but she wrote the paper as if she had, and she got an A on the paper, but she vowed in her conscience never to compromise her faith again. 3 years later, as a senior, she faced another difficult choice. One of her professors announced a class project advocating foster and adoption right for homosexuals, with signing and sending a letter to the state legislature. Emily fulfilled all the requirements of class, but drew the line on signing the letter with all of her classmates. She wouldn't sign the letter. She tried to explain to the professor that she couldn't advocate for something that went against her faith, but the professor became irate. Emily planned to discuss the issue with him again, but before she had the chance, her professor had filed a grievance against her, and there was a hearing, and she had to get a lawyer, and etc. They wouldn't even let her family come into this hearing. It was her alone facing lawyers. They interrogated her about her faith. They insisted she sign a contract vowing to close the gap between her faith and the social work program, or else not graduate. So she signed the statement. Once she had her diploma in hand, she went to Alliance for Defending Freedom. They filed legal action. 10 days later, the president of the university apologized to Emily, offered to pay for her to attend graduate school, and began an investigation of the social work department. The 4 tenured professors were moved to other departments. Okay, so another case of freedom. That's more of a freedom of religion case than a freedom of speech. This young man, Brian Hickman, he has a muscular disease, maybe muscular dystrophy, something like that. Essentially, there were auditions for the talent show, and his talent was singing a song called We Shine. He's got cerebral palsy. And in this song, We Shine, he talks about Jesus, and Jesus is mentioned. And when the school administrator said, "You say Jesus too many times, you can't perform." And so, again, Brian's mom contacted Alliance Defending Freedom. They filed a lawsuit, and he was allowed to perform his song on stage, and he could say Jesus during the song. And then Lydia Booth, this young girl, this was just earlier this year. You see hanging off her face is the black face mask. The face mask says, "I love Jesus" on it. Well, her school said you can't wear this mask because it, it's promoting a particular political point of view. And so I think this is still maybe in process right now. No, Jesus loves me is what her mask said. And this gets a little deep. Lydia's mom went to the administrators and said, there's nothing in the handbook that says you can't have a religious saying on this. It's, not hateful, that's very loving. And the administrator says, oh, yes, there is. And he touched up the parent handbook and sent her a new PDF. And they were able to go back way back and look at the original PDF. So this guy got in a lot of trouble for that as well. So these are the things that happen. These are happening thousands of times, and ADF is helping out with that. Now, this one is a little bit different. Brandy Levy, you may have heard about her. She was a cheerleader. I don't know what state she's in, but she was a cheerleader who didn't make the team. And she went on a profanity-laced rant on Twitter or Facebook and dropped a lot of F-bombs. And the administration of the school said, you are banned from any sports or cheerleading in the future. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court, not by ADF, but just by another legal firm. And in an 8-1 ruling, the ruling was for her because, even though it's offensive, people maybe don't want to hear that kind of crude, vulgar language. And you could call it hateful. It was her freedom of speech. And she didn't do it at school. She did it off school grounds, and she used a social media platform that had nothing to do with school. So she was also vindicated. You guys know Bari Weiss? Bari Weiss is a lesbian Jewish woman who until recently she was a New York Times reporter. Now, if you know anything about the New York Times, they're a very leftist, liberal publication. And, they have some stuff that's kind of center as well. But Bari Weiss recently resigned, and I wanted to read you some of the things that she talked about why she resigned from the New York Times. She said, a new consensus has emerged in the press, but perhaps especially at this paper, that truth isn't a process of collective discovery, but instead it's an orthodoxy already known to an enlightened few whose job is to inform everyone else. So freedom of speech is wrangled up in that, right? And then at the end, things that we believe in, certainly as Christians in Ratio Christi, ideas cannot win on their own. They need a voice. They need a hearing. So more and more we're seeing organizations where liberal ideas used to mean freely sharing ideas to come to some sort of ability to draw your own conclusions. That's what the liberal arts stands for. But now, even at the university level, as you know, that's being accosted. And then Peter Boghossian, I've recommended to you guys before this year to read his book called A Manual for Creating Atheists. Okay, so he's a staunch atheist, and he's an evangelical atheist. Yet, we would side with him, I think, in what he's been going through at Portland State. He recently resigned as well. And he talks about, at the bottom of the first paragraph, is individuals who often seem incapable of remembering this lesson about human freedom, that it's actually what our institutions are here for, to remind us that the freedom to question is our fundamental right. Educational institutions should remind us that our right is also our duty. So you've got two high profile, one a journalist, one a professor, who have recently resigned because even their very liberal free speech is being denied them in the university setting. So it's really interesting what's going on right now. And if we think it's just Christians, it's not. Certainly we're an easy target, but other folks are as well. So let's segue to apologetics relevance. So let me give you guys some objections and see what responses you would have, and then we'll close up. Somebody could accuse you of discriminating. So let's just say somebody says Christians shouldn't be able to discriminate because of their religious beliefs. So Emma, you should not be able to discriminate against somebody else because of your religious beliefs.
I would ask, are they just saying that about Christians? And also, what do they mean by discrimination? Because if Christians should be able to, no other group of beliefs should be able to either. And if what do they mean by discrimination? Because discrimination in and of itself, like the actual definition of the word, is not something that is bad. I think if people were to say unfairly discriminate, that would maybe be a different conversation. But if you just say discriminate in general,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
Well, we have, I'm going to play this with you, okay? We have people in this country right now who are refusing as business owners to bake cakes for people who want to have same-sex weddings. And that's discrimination against that same-sex couple.
Is it a private business who, if it's private business who they're not trying to represent and they've not signed away their rights to support one thing or another, lack support for one thing or another, they have the right to not get another person if they're a private establishment.
So they can choose not to serve, let's say they don't want to serve somebody who's from Russia. Any Russian immigrants, you can't come in the store to buy cakes.
If that is part of their religious belief.
So let me just stop you there. That is not protected by freedom of speech or freedom of religion. That would not be in that case. Nationality or skin color. But somebody's sexual orientation or sexual preference, or asking you to celebrate somebody's, that's the difference there. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The baker won, but then the state of Colorado was suing him again because somebody called and asked him to bake a cake that was pink on the inside, blue on the outside to celebrate a transgender transition. And he said, I can't do that. So they're suing him a second time. So ADF is also on that case, and that one will probably go all the way to the Supreme Court as well. Yeah. Thank you for letting me role play.
Sexuality is gender, discrimination against gender.
What they're doing is they're taking title, I think it's Title IX, that says you can't discriminate based on gender. And they're saying gender also relates to transgender. Yeah.
Well, and wasn't the whole thing about that case is like because it was supposedly in support of this thing that you discriminate based on your beliefs.
Based on your religious beliefs, yeah. So this is a test for religious beliefs. And can you have the conscience, a deeply held belief, and not celebrate? Now I have to bake a cake for somebody who walks in and he could say, hi, I'm a homosexual and I want this cake. You got to serve them, all right? But if he says, I want you to celebrate my wedding with me by baking me a custom cake using your artistic talent to do that, then this is what's at stake right now. And the same with a lady who's been asked to be a florist for a same-sex wedding. Let me give you another one. Don't force your religion on me. Daniel, what would you say if somebody says that to you? You know, I know how you're going to vote, and don't force your religious beliefs on me. Yeah, that's a good comeback, good tactical comeback. Yeah. And what do you mean by force? Yeah. How am I forcing? Yeah, on you. Any other thoughts on that one?
say that it's difficult to respond about something.
To mean something by it, yeah. Well, you know, you could say, also you could say, you know, I'm fine with you believing whatever fairy tales you want, Daniel. Okay, you can believe whatever fairy tale. I could be Catherine, right? Believe in the tooth fairy, but don't make me have to obey those rules in a public setting, right? You're voting to take my rights away based on your own religious beliefs of a fairy tale God. Yeah. Anyway, the rhetoric could get pretty strong. Go to the next one. Keep your beliefs out of the workplace. Keep your beliefs. Evan, you know, you're at your work and you've got a button, or you've got a poster, or you wear a shirt with a cross on it, or, you know, or you make a statement about going to church, or my grandmother just died, but I know she's in a better place because she believed, you know, and she's with God in heaven. Keep your beliefs out of the workplace.
Well, what I would respond to that would be, these beliefs are who I am.
Mm.
And no matter where I go, whether I'm work, driving home, or I'm out, my friends, or just enjoying myself somewhere, my Christian beliefs are a part of me, and I wouldn't be representing myself truly if I didn't speak. So, like if somebody would say something like that, it's me, it's who I am. And so if you want me, that's what you get. Anything else is just not being truthful about.
Yeah, that's a good response. And you should also know that you are protected. Now, you can't be evangelical in a work setting. That'll probably break the rules of most large companies. Small companies, depends on what the owner says. But my company specifically says I can't be evangelical. They're not using those words, but I cannot bring up, solicit. I can't bring up political and religious topics in a way where people feel kind of trapped by that. Like I'm a general manager, and so my level is, if I bring that up to people that are below me, then I'm considered to be kind of coercive of them. So there are things that I have to be careful of, but I talk freely to people in my group about what I do here, or going to church on Sunday, and that's part of my life. And if somebody's offended by that, then they're in a bad place. They can't hold a claim against me on that. Yeah. I think this is no, I just have those three. So here's some resources if you're interested in some of these things: freedom of speech, a biblical principle, the First Amendment. I thought Cornell Law did a nice job of outlining that, and then some of these other articles would be interesting. I'll put this up on GroupMe. So any final thoughts, questions for the group or for me as we go forward? The key is to understand that freedom of speech, freedom of religion, even though it's a little murky when we talk about what does God say about this, we have to infer. But it's not just something that you have when you're in the United States. That was kind of the point I was trying to make. Even when you're in Venezuela, or you're back in biblical times when Jesus was under the law of the Jewish authorities, he spoke the truth in love, in a correct way, and he had very thick skin. Okay. Any final thoughts, questions, ideas? Yeah. Mm. You censor yourself, censor your, yeah.
Like there's something idea, but and it's like, but then I was thinking about it, so I was thinking, like, what's there's something that is like not here.
Mm.
And it's like, I know the rest of it.
Mm.
Now like some of the most basic things I
Mm, 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 mm. Yeah. Anyone else have to self-censor?
I feel like subconsciously there's another that going on just
Mm-hmm.
like, and maybe sometimes it's a wise decision or it's a wise
Mm.
thing to current. I think a lot of times, but
Yeah.
I think even with my relationships with people where it's majority non-Christians or have other beliefs or anything like that, I always, I kind of subconsciously feel like I'm like,
Mhm.
and it's not it's not even a conscious decision. It's not that it is. Part of it is that, you know, for me, I think, like most people, when they grow up, learn how to interact with people. And that's something that you get better at as you become more interaction. But it turns out, like, oh, when you talk about certain things or bring a certain topic, maybe it kind of bristles or rubs people the wrong way sometimes. So I think sometimes, and even if I don't intend to, sometimes I'll leave out something that I would normally say if I was in Christian, or
Yeah.
or like maybe I wouldn't bring up a topic with, with someone
Mm-hmm.
because they're not Christian, so maybe you don't understand, or maybe it was good to like there's for instance one time where I said something that it within a group of who weren't Christians who they were like really confused about why I said it. I didn't have enough time to like explain what I meant by that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of things like that where it's like I feel like there's always a little bit of self-censoring going on, at least for me. It kind of makes me sad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think to remember is that it's not for us, for us, and it's not always proven, it's not always good for us. Say what's on your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, self-censoring is always a good thing, as long as it's done from a place of humility and thinking of what speech is going to bring those others to a better state.
It's a judgment call, right? Based on the circumstance, the people. You can, Greg Koukl is a famous apologist, and he talks about dropping a pebble in somebody's shoe, meaning you don't have to go hand-to-hand combat, but if you can just ask a question that gets them to think, and by the question, they know you're not totally aligned with them, but you've just kind of put a burr in their saddle. You've dropped a pebble in their shoe. You've given them something to think about. But you asked the question, Evan, do you have some examples as well?
Well, I definitely experienced it before. You know, a lot of it sometimes, like choosing whether I have to read those, it's not really strong, like, media. I really, I'm not gonna take it with my mind.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Because I think, well, people are reading this, make all kinds of assumptions, and not beneficial for them, or I haven't really found something about it, face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
Do not know it,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with our decision to do that because I know that
Yeah, especially with social media, that's what I wanted to do that self-censoring with humility, is the reason that you want to share that, just is it valuable. So in the social media context especially, I feel like there's a great danger of being abused. So I would absolutely favor not sharing. Thank you for sharing things in most cases.
And the word vanity is a good one. Go back to the video we watched, and the lady who said she was proud of being a Christian. I bet you she's the kind that would share things on social media that might reduce her ability to be influential with others. Yeah, because that's the key.
I think we should never use humility and timidity, though.
Right.
Humility is more of a attitude of, well, it's like the opposite of superiority. But timidness is the opposite of boldness. Like being humble and bold.
I think we see that a lot in Peter and Paul and some of the other apostles, and what we capture in the New Testament about how they faced those times in a humble way. And I love how Peter just says it. How can I not tell you about these great things that I want you to know? You know, he's so innocent about that. Let me give you one thought and then we'll close up. Great question, Evan. Thank you for that. Last weekend, my daughter, 24, she was at our house, and I brought up the law that's in effect now, the heartbeat law in Texas. And she said, well, I'm not so, I think there's, she was moving in the opposite direction that I thought she would, right? Because I'm a staunch supporter of a heartbeat bill. And I said, oh, so what about it? And she said, well, it doesn't have a provision, for rape or incest. So if that would have come up I work at Toyota in Plano, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I just leave it. It was wrong place, wrong time, wrong situation. I wouldn't be influential. But with my own daughter, I could go further. And I did go further and said, what do you mean by that? Well, a guy rapes somebody else and she has to carry, that baby. That's not fair. And then after she explained, I went one step further to say, well, so then the child has to pay for the sins of the father. The child is murdered, killed because of the sins of her father. Silence. I got back from my daughter like, and she didn't want to talk about it anymore. And that's cool. We just went on to something else. We were sitting in the hot tub at the moment, but I dropped a pebble in her shoe. I know I did. I dropped a boulder in her shoe actually. But I couldn't have done that at work except with maybe a real special friend at work, and certainly on social media. Oh my gosh, the hate that would have come from that, not that I have a big social media presence, but there's also some resources I'll recommend to you. Wayne Gruden's book, Politics According to the Bible, Ben Sasse, The Vanishing American Adult. He's a senator. Letters to a Young Progressive, Mike Adams. This is really good. This is an actual series of letters between Mike Adams and a student of his, Rod Dreer's Live Not by Lies, and then Salvo Magazines and the Babylon Bee. I've mentioned that before. So thank you guys for your attention and engagement tonight. I hope we all got something out of it. And Emma, would you close us up in prayer? Thanks.
especially as Christians, to be wise and stories and that's when
Amen. Amen.